Well, we have, is it winter time? So far, we have gone through winter without much winter, which I am very, very glad for. It's been wonderful. Yeah, I just use it part way. So I guess February could change. We're about there, but usually by February we're getting close to the end, so that's good. Our son and his family have been gone since Wednesday on a ski trip, back sometime tonight. And he told me, he said, "Dad, you'll have an easy time out there this week taking care of everything." Well, I've been going from early till almost dark every single day, and it has not anything been easy, so I'm not. But I got to go out this afternoon and make sure everything's done exactly right. I didn't leave any gates open or anything like that, or I'll be in serious trouble. Well, we're in Hebrews chapter 11. And we're on the subject of faith, and it makes me curious as to how we got to the subject of faith from everything we've been reading up through chapter 10 in the book of Hebrews. And so I want to make sure we don't lose the context of why you would put Hebrews chapter 11 in with the first 10 chapters. For the first 10 chapters have been altogether about one primary problem that's happening with Christians of a Jewish background. What's the problem? All right, they have been abandoning this life with Christ for a lot of reasons, perhaps. The same thing happens to us today. For a lot of reasons, we grow weary in well-doing. Is that true? And for a lot of reasons, we get pulled backwards. And they're getting pulled backwards. They're getting pulled backwards into Judaism. And so the argument has been over and over again in the first 10 chapters, Jesus is better than anything that you ever received in that old covenant. And that argument is made in several different ways. Finally, in chapter 10, he was more forceful than he's been in all of his writings, whoever the writer of the book of Hebrews is, more forceful, and said, let me give you one more thought here. If you go back after having known Christ, as Peter would say, the latter end is worse than the beginning, because what he says is, it's like you are doing despite to the Spirit of grace, that you're trotting underfoot the Son of Man. Those are serious, hard statements. And now all of a sudden we're in chapter 11 and we start talking about faith. How does that fit? How does that possibly fit with this whole letter being about not turning back from this faith that we've been given, this life in Christ that we've been given? How does that fit? Well, it's interesting to me that he starts talking about faith with what we call definition of faith. And almost always throughout all of our lives, we've heard that Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 1 is the definition of faith, right? Conviction of things not seen type thing, assurance of things hoped for. Well, I have long believed that that's not a definition by itself, because I've long believed that verse 6 is also tied to verse 1, and it's another way of stating the definition of faith. Because without it, it's impossible to please Him, but he that comes to God must believe what? That He exists, though he hasn't seen Him, conviction of things not seen, and that He is a what? Rewarder of those who diligently or earnestly seek Him. Now, those are the words that have been ringing in my mind ever since last Sunday afternoon. They truly have been coming back to my mind all since last Sunday afternoon. That He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. How does that tie with the fact that I might be persuaded to walk away? Well, faith by its definition means that I keep on going forward because I believe what? That He rewards. I believe that He rewards if I continue to seek Him. And he says in verse 1, this is what the ancients were commended for. The ancients were commended that they kept on going, and the thing that kept them going was faith. So in lieu of the fact, contrary to the idea that I would back up and say, I don't want to do this anymore, This thing called faith is a bedrock inside of me that keeps me moving forward even when I might be really discouraged. Even when I might be tempted to think another way, to go a different direction. This thing keeps me there. And so he says, look at Noah. And last Sunday afternoon we looked at Noah for a moment, but I ended with probably a remark that surprised you. I said as we ended, Noah is someone with whom I have great difficulty identifying. Now, I know the story. I know the story about how God spoke to him and said, the wickedness of this world is so great, I'm not going to tolerate it any longer. I'm going to kill everything on top of this earth. Everything that moves on the earth, everything that breathes air, I'm going to kill it, including the people. But I'll let you and your family be saved if you build an ark. We get the idea that there's a 100-year lag here by the time he goes into that ark. But then the story's about the flood, about waters that come from above and waters that come from below, and about him being in the ark. And I don't know what happened in that time he's building. I can't identify with it. 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 100 years, I don't know. And like I told you last week, did he get weary? Did he take his hammer and just throw it once in a while and say, I'm taking the day off? I mean, what was life like for Noah? I don't know. But what I know is he stuck with it because he truly believed deep down that God was real, and he believed that God would reward him and his family to go into that ark. So he stuck with it. But I don't know what happened in between. But now the writer turns to Abraham. He'll say more about Abraham in this chapter than any other character. And the thing about Abraham is, I know a lot of his struggles. Though he is commended over and over again in chapter 11, we're going to go back, not today, but next week probably, we're going to go back and see some of the struggles he had with this thing called faith. So it's not to make you think, this is what I'm trying to get to, it's not to make you think that I've got faith, so I'm in the saddle, and I'm safe, and it's not perfect. It's not paradise. It's not like I still don't get discouraged. It's not like I still don't get weary. It's not like I still don't think, I don't know if I can hang on any longer. That's how Abraham lived his life, and yet when it's all said and done, Abraham will stay with it. And he's commended for it. That's how the ancients were commended, that they believed that he existed, that he would reward them if they diligently, earnestly sought after him. You don't diligently, earnestly seek after if you're going backwards. By the way, it's an interesting thing just to think about the Scriptures. I had a conversation this week with a guy in Dallas, and he was talking about a ministry it's a prison ministry, been the largest in the United States for years, called the Bill Glass Prison Ministry. But Bill Glass is 85 years old, and they've had other people running it, and he was wanting to get the job. He worked for them for a while as the CEO. But he said they're wanting to go in a totally different direction. And I said, that's fine to go in a different direction, as long as you honor the past. You can go in a different direction, but you cannot violate the past by not honoring it, because God expects us to honor the past. And I told him, don't believe you'll be given a future if you don't honor the past. And so why do you think God is such a stickler on saying and repeating in the New Testament, honor your father and your mother, that it may go well with you, you may have a long life on this earth? What's that all about? God expects us to honor the past, even though it's not perfect. Well, the whole conversation comes back to this. We can honor, we can look at our past, but we're not to live in the past. Faith is not living in the past. Faith is living now and into the future. You can honor the past, and you can say, I appreciate the past and everything, but we're never taught to live in the past. In fact, you can make your life miserable by looking into your past and thinking about all the mistakes you've made in decisions. You ever thought about that? I mean, I found myself thinking at this age in life, you know, I could have made all different kinds of choices in career paths. I could have done this. There was all kinds of things, and I find myself wondering, it's futile thinking. I can't recreate that past. You just make yourself what? That's right, miserable. Miserable is the word. We are a faith people. We are a forward people. We are thinking that God is going to reward those who diligently seek Him. So now we start reading about Abraham, and we pick it up in verse 11 or verse 8. By faith, Abraham. Now, it's the same word. Same definition. By faith, Abraham. I'm going to read quite a bit here because we've got to go back and unpack it, and we'll unpack it by looking at what really happened in his life. But by faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. You see, that's not natural. That is not natural. We don't like to go at someone's request when we don't know exactly where we're going. But he obeyed and went. Now we'll find out why, because he's a rewarder of those who diligently seek him, and God made some massive promises to Abraham. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. Now, I don't know if everybody lived in a tent, but it doesn't sound like it. It sounded to me like he was on the move a lot. He lived in a tent. I don't know if that's how big that tent was. I don't know anything about it. But somehow the Scripture's making the point here that it wasn't, so to speak, permanent. And there's something about this, that he's on the move. He lived in a tent. And by the way, his sons lived in a tent. His son and his grandson lived in a tent. For he was looking forward to a city with foundations whose architect and builder is God. He kept looking forward to something that God was going to do, so that it was going to be better than a tent. Now, you see that forward look? He kept looking forward. If you and I don't have something to look forward to in our journey with God, we likely will go backwards. Everybody understand that? In fact, I might even could argue, if you and I don't keep having something to look forward to in this life, period, we get really discouraged and we go backwards. So, he was looking forward to a city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. And by faith, Abraham, even though he was past age, and Sarah herself was barren, when is enabled to become a father because he considered him faithful who had made the promise. Now that's an important point. He considered the one who had made the promise, who was whom? God. He considered him, what's the word here? Faithful. There's a big difference between the word faithful and the word faith. Because the idea of God being faithful, we thank him occasionally in our prayers, and hopefully more than occasionally in our prayers, that he is faithful. That means he's what? He's trustworthy. That's part of it. He's consistent. And he is always, always, and always, underline it 3 times, going to do what he promised. God, he's always going to do what he promised. And Abraham considered that he was going to do what he promised. And so he was willing to do what God asked because he knew God would fulfill his end of the bargain. So Abraham, though he was past age and though Sarah was barren, he considered God faithful in his promise. Now, part of the promise to Abraham was what? You'll have a child. That's part of the promise. And well, wait till we get to the point here. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashores. This one man who was not supposed to be what? Able to do what? Have children. It's not supposed to. And yet, from this one man who was as good as dead, so that means when you're about 90 or 100, you're as good as what? I'm getting closer. I'm telling you, but he would have descendants that were what? As numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sands on the seashore. Now, those descendants, we know, when he said you will have Isaac, there was something beyond Isaac, because in that original promise in Genesis chapter 12, Isaac, you're going to have a child, and through that child, all the people of the earth will be what? Blessed. All the people of the earth will be blessed. So he's talking about down through this line, ultimately who comes? Jesus comes. And because of Jesus, we all then have the possibility of our sins being taken away because of his shed blood. Now, will Abraham ever see Jesus? No. Will he ever truly comprehend the whole scope of what Jesus will do to this earth? No. But that doesn't affect me much, because how many of you truly comprehend what heaven will be like? And how will you, what is this place there's no suffering, there's no crying, and and it goes on forever and forever. And what is this place where we're in the presence of God and his Son? And I cannot put that all together in here. I cannot make it all fit, because my mind is too limited. It doesn't have that. God never gave us that ability. So he said, in lieu of you having that ability, I want you to believe me. I want you to trust me. I want you to be convinced of those things that you have not seen. I want you to be assured. I want you to be sure or assured of those things that you hope for. I want you to believe that God will reward those who diligently seek him, just like Abraham did. Because Abraham, he could not comprehend all that God was meaning through his son Isaac. It was impossible. But that's what he did. So, verse 13. All of these people were still living by faith when they died. Now that's another interesting, powerful statement. They were still living by faith when they died. Now if they were still living by faith when they died, that means everything that they were thinking, everything that God promised, had not yet been what? Realized, had not been realized physically. So, if we're still living by faith when we die, that means that everything that we have trusted from God to be true, we still think is coming. Is that right? And so, again, the greatest example would be this thing of heaven, this thing of life after this body dies. You know, you stop and think about that. That's a bit absurd, don't you think? Life after something dies. I mean, Mitch said, Dad, you won't have a bit of problem. The very first day, I look up, and here's this heifer having a calf. I think, I wonder if I know how to pull that calf. But she had the calf. Now Ken, in his great wisdom, sees a calf out there all curled up. He thinks everything's fine. I should have called Greg. I didn't call Greg. I think everything's fine. But late in the afternoon, I thought, I'm going to put that heifer and that calf in a special pen. I get out there. Calf won't get up. I realize the calf hadn't been up all day. I think, oh, Ken, you're in serious trouble when Mitch finds out. So I finally get him up. I give him a bag of colostrum. I tube him. He's still looking at me. Can't even move his head. He makes a few sounds. That evening, next morning, I tube him again. Next day, I tube him. Afternoon, I tube him again. Yesterday morning, guess what? That boy's dead. That boy's dead. So I put him in the back of my side-by-side and haul him to a sinkhole so Mitch won't see him. But I'm going to tell you something. Even if I take Greg with me this afternoon, we pull him out of the sinkhole, he's not going to make him live again. He's dead to stay. To tell me that I'm going to die and in one way really never die, the real me is going to live forever, how does that story go over with the average person? How does that story go over with someone who thinks logically? They're going to say you're a what? You're crazy. You're crazy. Yet, we believe it with all of our might. We believe it with all of our might. That when we take our last breath, the angels are going to carry the real us to a place of paradise. We even believe this story we don't completely understand about how, and my time's up, but let me just finish it like this. But how that one day Jesus is going to come again. He's going to bring back with him all the redeemed of all the ages. According to 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, beginning verse 13. He's going to bring with them all. And the graves are going to be opened. And the bodies are going to come forth. And the spirits are going to be reunited. And we're going to be caught up together in the sky to be with the Lord forever. So encourage each other with these words. That is quite a story. But it says Abraham had that same kind of story. And he was still living by that kind of conviction and belief when he died. Now, contrast that with the first 10 chapters. Because they were doing what with that belief and that story? Whatever the story was that they were thinking about. Because God gave an outlandish story to Noah. He gave an outlandish story to Abraham, to Job, but when they died, they still what? Believed the story. So if I'm still hanging on to the belief, it's not likely I'm going to do what? Go back. So faith is the next step in the logical progression of the argument of the writer of the book of Hebrews. You and I just have to see how special, important faith is, but it's not a quality. It's not a quality. It's a life. It's a life. It's not an ingredient like I'm putting a cake together that I put another little bit of this in it. It's a life. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of living. It's a life. And that's how Abraham lived. He lived a life. But next week we're going to go back and look at some of the things that Abraham went through, because it makes me look at it and say, whoa, that looks more like me. I feel I can identify with that one. You know, because
this is kind of funny to me because he's speaking to Jews, and he's reminding them of the things that they want to go back to. The people that they saw as fathers were looking forward to the thing they're abandoning.
Oh, what a great point. You everybody catch what he just said? Burke is saying it's just kind of ironic the way he's doing this, because what they want to go back to is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Moses, and Noah. That's what they want to go back to. And the writer's making the argument that they did exactly what we're asking you to do today. You just got lost in this law somewhere, and you got lost in the fact that law keeping would get you there. But faith is what they were commended for. It's not going to tell you one time they were commended because they kept the Sabbath day. I'm not going to tell you one time they were commended because they didn't touch a dead person and became unclean. There are hundreds and hundreds of laws. They're commended because they live by faith. And we're to live by faith today until we take that last breath.